Hello, my name is Dr. Roger Henderson. I'm a GP in southwest Scotland, and I also co-host the GPnotebook study groups. Welcome once again to this GPnotebook podcast, where we discuss bite-sized topics aimed at all those of us working in primary care. Now, you can find us on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, so do please follow us to receive notifications about new episodes. And if you like what you hear, and we really hope that you do please consider leaving a review to help other listeners find us. You can also follow us on Twitter at GPnotebook for more information about new podcast episodes and study groups, and you can find me there too at Roger the Doctor. Finally, you can visit GPnotebook.com for podcast episode show notes and to find out more about our study group meetings that happen all through the year. Now, in this episode, I'm going to be discussing an update on vaping, and this is in fact something I discuss in our study group 4, so we do hope to see you at one of those, and if you want to know more about this topic, then study group 4, you'll find me speaking on that, and these happen throughout the year. Now, you might be forgiven for thinking that e-cigarettes are a modern invention, but in fact, we can go back almost 100 years, to 1927, in fact, when a certain Joseph Robinson filed a patent in New York for an electrical vaporizer device that would allow for a compound to be vaporized into a mouthpiece. Now, whatever reasons he did it, we don't know, and it was probably for medicinal purposes, but the invention never went anywhere, and both he and it appear to have been quickly forgotten. In the 1980s and 1990s, there were various patents filed for nicotine-based inhaling devices, but they had little commercial success, and it was left to a Chinese businessman called Hon Lik to start the race to what we would now call e-cigarettes. Now, Lik was a very heavy smoker, sort of a 3-pack-a-day man, and he'd been trying to quit using conventional nicotine patches. And in 2003, he filed his patent for a high-frequency piezoelectric device that vaporized a pressurized jet of nicotine-containing liquid. Now, the unique thing about this lay in the fact that the nicotine was protected from being vaporized until it was heated, and its appearance was of a tobacco-free cigarette that produced a smoke-like vapor, although no smoke as such was produced. The very first e-cigarette went on sale in China in 2004, and there have been at least half a dozen evolving generations of device since then. There are many different types now available. However, all of them, and whatever their appearance, have 3 key elements. They have a battery that can be rechargeable, that heats up an atomizer or a coil, which then vaporizes an e-liquid or juice into vapor that's then inhaled. Now, some of the common e-cigarettes you may see walking down the street include cig-alikes, and the appeal of these is that they both look and feel like conventional cigarettes, hence the name. You can get vape pens, and these can either use pre-filled cartridges or allow users to refill them with their own e-liquid formulations, depending on their preferences. You can get what are called tank systems. Now, these are usually bulkier than most other e-cigarette devices, but again, they enable users to alter most variables in them, including the formulation of the e-liquid in them and the battery power. And different amounts of nicotine in refill liquids can help to taper down nicotine use in these devices. More commonly, disposables we see are designed to be cheap and discarded after the e-liquid in them has been used up. And this has obviously recently raised environmental concerns as well. They are relatively small, they are concealable, and they're available in a wide range of colours and flavours. Now, they should contain a maximum of 2 ml of nicotine-containing liquid, and this is often described by users as about 600 to 800 puffs. A maximum strength of 2%, 20 milligram per mil nicotine-containing liquid contains the same nicotine content as about 18 to 22 cigarettes. But it must be noted that any device that contains more than 2 ml or greater 20 milligram per mil strength does not meet UK regulations. The latest generation of e-cigarettes are pods. Now, these often contain nicotine salts and so provide high doses of nicotine without the usual harsh sensation that other devices may cause. And like disposables, they come in a range of colours and flavours, and they often look like USB sticks, and so they can be easily concealed. And the rapid rise in youth vaping we've seen in recent years does appear to be associated with the growth in the use of both pods and disposables. You may have heard of heat-not-burn devices, which contain tobacco, but there's limited independent evidence about their safety, and their use for quitting smoking hasn't been studied, so we should not be recommending these for use to quit smoking. Now, for most e-cigarette users, the e-liquid that they use is the key to their satisfaction rating of the system they choose to use. And there are typically 4 key components here. There's glycerin, there's propylene glycol, there's nicotine, although some preparations can be nicotine-free, and there's flavouring. Now, the vegetable glycerin provides the vapour, and the thinner propylene glycol carries the flavour. So this vegetable glycerin propylene glycol ratio determines the amount of vaping cloud that's produced, as well as the flavour intensity. So a higher vegetable glycerin score gives more cloud but less flavour, and you may sometimes see people walking down the street surrounded by clouds of vapour from their vape. And a higher propylene glycol score gives less cloud but a bigger hit and often more flavour. And when you talk to hardened smokers using e-cigarettes, they try to reproduce the throat hit that they feel when they drag hard on a conventional cigarette by increasing the level of propylene glycol in their device. Now, when vapes first appeared, the terms e-cigarette was appropriate because most actually looked like a cigarette, but with such a wide range of products, now the term is becoming a little obsolete, but there is no currently agreed consensus as a common terminology, and so vaping has, by dint of use, increasingly become the term that we use for e-cigarette use. Now, over the last 10 years or so, the amount of British adults who vape has been steadily increasing, and we're up to just over 9% or so now. But despite this, there are still more smokers than vape users, with about 14% of British adults still using traditional cigarettes. Now, in addition to youth vaping plateauing slightly, 18.4% of children had tried vaping, down from 20.5% in 2023, although this year is the first year on record where the rate of regular use of vapes has been higher than the rate of occasional use. So, what about e-cigarette use as a smoking cessation aid? Now, although the use of what are often unregulated vapes in the under 18 age group is a serious concern, and I'll come back to look at that shortly, e-cigarettes that are regulated and used in adults are a highly useful smoking cessation aid in helping those adult smokers to quit their tobacco habit. And compared to inhaling tobacco smoke, vaping still appears to pose a fraction of the risk, but we must never view these as being risk-free. But for people who do smoke, vaping is much safer, and as a general point, people who don't smoke shouldn't vape, and I think we'd all agree with that. The Royal College of Physicians has recognised vapes as an effective treatment for tobacco dependency and the need to improve awareness about the safety of vapes compared to cigarettes. Now, a nice Cochrane 2024 review looked at about 88 studies involving over 27,000 adult smokers, and they compared e-cigarettes with nicotine replacement therapy, varenicline, e-cigarettes without nicotine, heated tobacco products, and no support in terms of how they could help people stop smoking. And it found that people were more likely to stop smoking for at least 6 months using nicotine-containing e-cigarettes than by using nicotine replacement therapy alone or e-cigarettes without nicotine. It also found that e-cigarettes may help more people to stop smoking than no support or behavioural support only. So, for every 100 people using nicotine e-cigarettes to stop smoking, 8 to 10% might successfully stop, compared with only 6% of people using nicotine replacement therapy, 7% using e-cigarettes without nicotine, or 4% having no support or behavioural support only. A review that is sometimes missed was the 2022 Nicotine Vaping in England review, and this was the 8th in a series of independent reports on vaping, originally commissioned by Public Health England and now by the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities in the Department of Health and Social Care, and its main focus is a systemic review of the evidence on the health risks of nicotine vaping. And it primarily looks at data on human exposure to vaping, complemented with some findings from animal and cell studies. And the important thing here is that it currently provides the most robust evidence on the health risks of vaping to date, as well as assessing the relative risks of vaping compared with smoking and the absolute risks of vaping compared with not vaping or smoking. So the latest conclusions that we have based on current evidence are well worth knowing, and these are that in the short and medium term, vaping appears to pose a small fraction of the risks compared to smoking. It's not risk-free, particularly for people who've never smoked, and the evidence is mostly limited to short and medium-term effects, and the studies that assess longer-term vaping are necessary. And this is a key thing here about vaping. We simply do not have the 20 to 30-year data that we have with tobacco. So more standardized and consistent methodologies in future studies will improve the interpretation of any evidence here. The study also looked at biomarkers of toxicant exposure, so measurements of potentially harmful substance levels in the body. And the evidence reviewed suggests there is significantly lower exposure to harmful substances from vaping compared with smoking, as shown by biomarkers associated with things like the risk of cancer, respiratory and cardiovascular conditions. It showed that there was similar or higher exposure to harmful substances from vaping compared with not using nicotine products, but there was no significant increase of toxicant biomarkers after short-term second-hand exposure to vaping amongst people who don't smoke or vape. Now, combining vapes with behavioural support is much more likely to result in a smoker successfully stopping smoking, and patients should be offered behavioural support regardless of what option they choose to help them quit. But compared to trying to quit alone, people who smoke are up to 3 times more likely to quit with expert behavioural support combined with stop smoking aids, typically pharmacotherapy. Local stop smoking services offer behavioural support delivered by trained advisors for between 4 and 12 weeks, and that support should always be combined with an offer of a vape with medicinally licensed stop smoking products to adults who want to quit smoking. We now say that all local stop smoking services should include vaping with behavioural support as one of the possible options available that are more likely to result in successfully stopping smoking. Well, so far so good, but obviously we do have concerns around e-cigarettes, particularly in the under-18s, and the number of children using vapes in the UK has tripled in the past 3 years, and a worrying 1 in 5 children admitted to trying vaping in March to April 2023. So since 2021, the proportion of 11 to 18-year-olds vaping has been greater than those smoking. And in 2024, 8% of that 11 to 18-year-old age group say they regularly vape. There are about 4.5 million British vapers currently, and 11% of those are aged 19 to 24. And although it is illegal to sell vaping products to anyone aged under 18, as we know, many young people can easily buy these from sellers who don't enforce the law, both online and in person. We also know that adolescents are heavily influenced by social media platforms and influencers, along with intensive marketing campaigns promoting brightly coloured, highly flavoured, cheap, disposable vapes. And children do appear, unfortunately, to be able to easily obtain illegal vapes, which often contain high levels of things like lead, nickel, and chromium. However, it is still the case that, contrary to popular belief, vaping is not appearing to act as a gateway for smoking. And in fact, smoking tobacco rates amongst young people have continued to decline since 1996. Now, you may have heard of EVALI, so e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury, because a cluster outbreak was identified by the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention in America in 2019, with many of these cases in the adolescent population. Now, because this was a cluster rather than a generalized outbreak, it was felt this was a particular environmental factor in that area. And the CDC opened a national database of cases, and they reached a peak in September 2019. What their investigation found was that a vaping liquid additive called vitamin E acetate was strongly linked to this EVALI outbreak, with most cases being seen in teenagers and young adults. And the symptoms were typically of shortness of breath or chest pain before more severe breathing difficulty led to hospital admission. The experts there now suspect that contamination with vitamin E acetate in some tetrahydrocannabinol containing e-cigarettes were the cause of EVALI. But other contaminants and other factors such as pre-existing lung disease may have played a role. Since then, though, the number of new EVALI cases has declined dramatically, probably due to public health messaging about a link between tetrahydrocannabinol in e-cigarettes and EVALI, and removal of vitamin E acetate from e-cigarettes as well. And due to decreased cases and the identification of these possible causes, the CDC in fact stopped collecting data on EVALI cases from early 2020. You may also have heard of something called popcorn lung. There's a big debate at the moment as to whether vapes can cause popcorn lung, more correctly known as bronchiolitis obliterans. This is a type of inflammation of the lung that can cause wheezing, coughing, and shortness of breath, and over time it leads to scarring of the alveoli, along with thickening and narrowing of the airways. Now, the reason it's sometimes mentioned as a possible consequence of e-cigarette use is the chemical diacetyl, which is found in some unregulated and illegal e-cigarette flavours, and diacetyl is one cause of this condition. And the name, in fact, comes from reports of the illness due to diacetyl amongst workers in a microwave popcorn factory. So although diacetyl is contained in cigarette smoke, it's actually banned as an ingredient in UK-regulated nicotine vapes and e-liquids. More recently, according to research published in the respiratory journal Thorax, the more time spent on social media, the greater the likelihood that children and young people will either both smoke and or vape. And this may well just be due to exposure to images and messaging on social media about e-cigarettes. Perhaps an even more concerning newer finding in a very large US study that's just been published in April this year found that vapers appear to be more likely to suffer from heart failure than those who had never used e-cigarettes. Now, the results of this study showed that people who used e-cigarettes at any point were up to 19% more likely to develop heart failure compared to people who had never used e-cigarettes. And in calculating this percentage difference, the researchers accounted for a variety of demographic and socioeconomic factors, other heart disease risk factors, and participants' past and current use of other substances, including alcohol and tobacco products. And the researchers also found that there was no evidence that the participants' age, sex, or smoking status modified the relationship between e-cigarettes and heart failure. Now, obviously, we need more studies to confirm this possible link, but if this is found to be proven, then it does raise the possibility of a significant long-term health risk now being linked to e-cigarette usage. So using regulated and licensed e-cigarettes does appear to pose a small fraction of the risks of smoking, and switching to these, ideally before quitting any form of nicotine completely, does significantly reduce exposure to toxins that are associated with cancer, cardiovascular disease, and lung disease. Most of the toxic chemicals and carcinogens that we find in tobacco smoke are not contained in vape aerosol. And combining vapes with behavioural support gives smokers the best chance of them stopping, and the best smoker does remain one who has successfully quit and does not use any tobacco or nicotine-containing products. So I suppose the messages from the Wayside Pulpit today are several, which are that smoking remains the single biggest preventable cause of death and ill health in England, and is obviously a significant driver of health inequalities. Licensed, regulated vapes in adults are an effective aid for adults to quit smoking, and if you smoke, vaping still appears to be significantly safer than smoking. It has minimal serious side effects when used for a short time to stop smoking, but we do still have insufficient data at the moment to know about any potential longer-term health issues that are linked to vaping. Anyone who wants to quit smoking using vapes should be encouraged to quit smoking completely and then switch to vaping before tailing these off. And people who do not smoke should not vape at any age. And anyone under the age of 18 should never vape due to the unknown longer-term harms of vaping. So I do hope you found that overview of vaping where we are in 2024 helpful, and do have a look at the show notes that accompany this episode at GPnotebook.com. I'd be very grateful if you consider following us and leaving us a review on your favourite podcast platform, and do feel free to get in touch via social media, GP Notebook, or email us at support@gpnotebook.com if you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future podcasts. We really do love to hear from you. You should also visit us at GPnotebook.com to register for our virtual GP Notebook study groups and to download free shortcuts to help improve the lives of our patients in primary care. But as always, until the next time, thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.